Hi, and welcome back to the Data Wall podcast in the newest episode. I'm Stan, and today with me we've got Michał Miler, a Chief Product Officer and a VP of Product at Entain CE. And today we'll be discussing data product strategy. But before we move into the details, Michał, over to you. Tell us and your guests, where do you come from? What are your responsibilities and focus areas? What you've been doing so far and what led you to the position when you're in right now today?
Hi, Stan. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm Michał Miler. I was recently the Chief Product Officer at the STS. STS is the number one betting operator in Poland. After its IPO and €1 billion acquisition, I became Vice President of Product at Entain CE. Entain CE is an entity partially owned by the Entain PLC on London Stock Exchange. And right now we are part of the group together with Croatian Supersport, which is also number one on its own market. My work there was mostly about finishing the migration, and it culminated in a major strategic project, which I just finished. It was post-acquisition integration. Now, once the integration is complete, I'm excited to start exploring new challenges. One more thing beside that, I'm also a husband and a father to an 8-year-old girl, which is the next room. So I hope she will not generate too much noise today.
In case we just erase the background noise in the post-production, not to worry about this. And when you say, so you were working at STS, the biggest sportsbook operator in Poland for the last 15 years. You've spent those 15 years altogether. And how did the market position of your company evolve over time, given that we had multiple things happening in the background? There was, on one side, legal landscape changing. There was the shift from land-based physical locations to online, digitalization, competition, and so forth. How do you see it?
Well, it was a hell of a journey. I think the story of STS could be a good material for a book, right? So I'll explain this maybe in shorter version. So as you said, when I joined STS, it was basically the only retail operation only company. And there was this 90s vibe there. So it was in single house family and quite small city in Poland. There was a pretty old system which ran on Slackware Linux. For hardcore Linux fans, that you know what it is. There was also Informix database. I believe it's IBM, right? So the stack was pretty interesting, but it works. And what was interesting, it was synced with main server a few times a day, so it wasn't online. We connected there via ESDN modems, and it all ran on these old do-it-yourself PCs with various equipments, right? So it was something really, really interesting. But still, we were at the time number one on Polish market, and we were acquired by Stanleybet Europe. And what Stanleybet bring was the fully online system, modern hardware, because we get Fujitsu PCs with door-to-door support. So, hardware stack was great. And it's supposed to be great, right? But in fact, it really wasn't. The software was written in Visual Basic and it crashed all the time. There was no database. There was some sort of exchange of files, binary files, which are like stored on some, I don't know where exactly, and were just exchanged between the computers in the shops. And it was one big mess. To be frank, STS almost went bankrupt with them. And that experience became a foundational lesson for us. I would say it shaped the company DNA, and it taught us two critical things. Like first, that we need to own our own technology, right? We need to really own it. And second, we need to make it our competitive advantage. Otherwise, we are prone to have some problems which we are completely not in control of. And number one player simply cannot afford it, right? So this was the thing. And the rest is history. We bought platform provider from Czech Republic. It was Betsys. So we took full control over it. As soon as the legislation allowed, we launched online operation. And we were one of the first bookmakers with native application on both Android and iOS. And we are constantly trying to push the barriers to be on the edge and keep innovating, right? After about a year, once we migrate to BETSYS, we regain the number one position and we keep it until today, right? Which brings us through the whole transition of IPO and later the acquisition. So yeah, it was a hell of a journey, as I said.
And also, based on what you mentioned, you also were wearing different hats and was having different roles which were changing over the time. And I also know that you're a great friend with data. So how this evolution of your position and of your responsibilities has shaped your approach towards data and analytics?
Yeah, so I would say that like my entire journey with data could be summed up as a kind of a shift from being reactive to being more proactive, right? It started actually in IT because when I joined STS, this is important thing, I started working in the IT department and I was really frustrated with constant failures of those old PCs, which I mentioned before, right? And the fact that we learn about, for example, failure of HD hard disk drive when it crashed the shop and shop was closed for half a day or even more. Right, so I started with the really simple things like installing Nagios to monitor the retail hardware and identify problems before they occur. So found that this is something wrong before. Later, when we launched the online operation, we lost control over clients, over the environment. Suddenly, the hardware we had to monitor was the end clients' devices, their PCs, their mobile phones, right? So clients were complaining that something wasn't working. And of course, our default response was the classic, well, it works for me, right? So, but we, of course, you cannot act like that. You need to do something with it. So again, like we need some improvements. And I remember when we installed the Sentry tool, which helped a lot because it was collecting all the JavaScript errors and we were able to browse them. So we knew about the issues as soon as they appeared, even on some exotic configuration. And what is important are developers have some dedicated time in their sprints to fix those problems, right? So again, like this from being reactive to proactive. But this is history because last 10 years of my career has been focused on product development. And such approach was also important there because, instead of just shipping a number of features and hoping something would stick, I always advocated for a more like data-driven approach. In a product development, people always have brilliant ideas, right? There's so many people in the company and each of them have at least 2 ideas. In fact, sometimes 10 or more, right? So how to live with it, right? You always have limited resources. And even if you don't have limited resources, it's really bad idea to focus on everything, right? You need to be smart, right? So we started thinking how we'll know, for example, does this feature A or feature B will, for example, increase the client's retention? And if yes, then by what amount, right? And over the years, we tested multiple approaches and started using some standard measures for product ideas, which later we compared with the real results, right? What we assumed and what eventually happened. Of course, it's always a guessing game, right? But the more you practice it, guessing and measuring, then the better you get. And lastly, if you ask about data, I would say it can be also implemented on like wider organization layer, right, to improve the organization itself. I really recommend the book Team Topologies. If you haven't heard, please, and you are somehow responsible for the organization or just curious, please read it, which explain concept like, for example, Dunbar number, which says with how many people you can work with and why it works and when it stops and why. There's also Conway law, which shapes our software, whether you want it or not. So yeah, I could probably talk about this all day. So maybe let's stop here, right?
I actually have an interesting question that touches on what you just mentioned, because you mentioned that you reached a point where everyone has at least 2 ideas and 3 opinions. If you ask everyone, and if you oftentimes, especially in product development, based on what I have seen, even internally or at other companies, after a release of a certain package and features, you come to a point that you get 3 times more demand and more backlog for certain things. You start to prioritize, you start to take things off the backlog, decide what's going to make it to the next release, what's not going to make it. And then, so you were saying that, okay, that's the good moment to get some data that will actually tell us what makes sense to do.
Okay, so first of all, I would do a step back, right? Because you never improve the situation with just prioritization of the features, right? First of all, if the organization reaches some certain point, you need to decide what, as an organization, want to focus on, and then start building like competencies and the team around that. So it's not like every single feature is competing with every single other feature from even different domain. So this is the way how we deal with it. We split the organization in like 5 parts, not go into details, but we built, let's say, 5 areas of interest for the company. We built really strong teams. At the beginning, of course, they weren't strong, but the more they work in this environment, the stronger they became. They gain like bigger ownership of the area, right? And it really started paying back. So we decided basically which areas of the business are important and let the people in the areas, in those specific areas, decide what is the most important in those areas, right? So diversify the decision-making process. And yeah, it really paid up. And one of the critical things there, of course, was the data, right? So make sure that these people are aware of they have know-how of the business, right? This is one thing. Second, they have reliable data to work on. And once they ship something or they're planning to ship something, they'll know that they will be able to measure the impact of what they did. Because otherwise it's still like, shooting and hoping for the best, right?
I also know that you had the BI teams within your scope of responsibility. So could you please tell a bit more about the context? Because many times the BI team is perceived as a technology, sometimes as engineering. And if I understand well, you had a more product data-driven approach, but actually I'm really curious about that.
Yes. So first of all, I always was very happy that at STS, IT wasn't seen as a cost center. Actually, it was quite opposite. I remember that a former CEO, Mateusz Siroszek, always joked that his favorite thing to spend money on were servers and data storages, right? So he was actually really happy to do so. So IT was at the very heart of our operation, was seen as a competitive advantage. And going back to your question, so our organization grew up very fast, and we had to adapt and review our structure every 6 to 12 months. And data being data aware started actually in product team from single web analyst, but very shortly the demand for his work, exploded. We hired another person. I was thinking about hiring another one, but I realized that actually I wasn't equipped enough to be able to develop this specific skill set which was needed there. So we decided together with Wojtek Sznapka, our CTO at the time, that we'll start building the data team under his wings. And he did a brilliant job. Like he built a very solid team consisting of data engineers, data analysts, and scientists. Classic setup, right? So it was based on very solid technology, solid competencies, and so on. We had great people as well. So, but they were kind of living at some point in tech bubble because this team consists of 15 or 16 people at the time. So they were quite a big team. And they just start like living their own life, isolated from the business. The backlog was piling up, reports were delayed, and very often unused, actually, because people didn't even want to wait for the data which they requested. Classic corporate drama, right? Where nobody was happy. So we decided we need to do something with it. We didn't know what. We actually asked for some external help. We consulted Michał Witkowski, by the way, kudos to him, and he performed our audit for us. And one of the most critical recommendations was that we need to bring analysts closer to the business decisions. And since I always perceived the product department as a natural bridge between the tech and the business, moving the analytics team into the product organization was the logical step we decided to take.
And what would you say was the consequence afterwards? Because it's not only changing the manager in the list of employees who's the assigned manager, but rather it's more beyond that. So what happened afterwards?
Yeah, that's very true. Well, first of all, overall, ultimately, it went very well. It was very logical on the paper, but as usual, when you're dealing with the people, nothing is easy, right? So we had to part ways with the team leader who wasn't supporting the idea, but life absorbed a vacuum, right? And one of the team members stepped up and become the new leader. This really helped us the transition, but it still required time and a lot of daily work to build new habits, new way of thinking. And something which I strongly believe, and what was the most crucial part of the transition, was not just changing the org chart. It enabled us to make some changes, but it didn't make a change by itself. The most important part was redefining the team's mission. So we shifted the purpose from delivering the accurate reports with asterisks after eternity to delivering insights that help make better business decisions. So it wasn't about technology, about the tools or the quality of the data or whatever, right? It was about driving business impact. And I would strongly believe that this will be something which will make the analysts more important within the organization, right? Because they are not just a tool. They are like a partner, right? With product manager in the team, right? So for me, it was really tempting. So we moved the analysts physically also to very close to product managers, and slowly new bonds were created between them, right? Some informal way of communication, informal way of ordering some reports, more discussion of the data, etc., etc. And also transfer of the know-how and specialization of those people, because before they were jumping between the requests from all over the company, right? So they couldn't grasp all of that, right? So they couldn't specialize on anything, right? Of course, some people quit, but what is even more important that new hires joined the team with totally different mindset. And we were looking for different people from the moment of this transition. And I would say it took a year and a half, and I'm very proud of what we achieved. Of course, nothing went perfect, but it definitely improved basically all the important metrics of the BIs, with the foremost important, this impact on business decisions, because they were in the middle of the action, in the middle of the place where decisions are made, right, together with product managers. And also business start looking at them differently, not like, what you're talking to me, you sometimes don't have a clue what they're talking, right? This and that is missing. Yeah, it changed. And this is, I believe, something very important. But again, started from the fact that we need to change the organization every 6 to 12 months, and it's still the case. And after the acquisition and merge of the companies, we need to, again, take different approach. So actually, again, going back to more centralized approach with the data, because we need to unify to BI teams. But what they learned during the way would stay with them. So I believe at the end of the day, this was something which was needed, and just we need to move on, right?
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned one thing that actually rings a bell with typical projects and assignments where I'm involved as well. So there's these two conflicting needs. So on one side, from an, let's say, engineering perspective or delivery perspective or BI perspective, you want to do a great report, you want to work on the excellence, because the way from a developer perspective you define success is that from a technological perspective, this is well advanced and developed to the highest standards. And on the other hand, you have the business needs where I need the report today, I don't need it in 3 weeks' time, or maybe, hey, but I need something else than what I received after 1 month. And at the same time, moving from technology to product from BI perspective means that, or rather, this is a question. You want to go fast. Does it mean that you experience a situation that it generates you more work because instead of reusing something that's been developed previously or expanding, you want to have new reports?
Yeah, I would say it was the central challenge actually, because team back then was usually being like extremely precise, really extremely precise. They had really great intentions, but the level of precision didn't support the agility the business need. But it's oversimplified because my view is there is no silver bullet, right? You need to both approaches, but for different contexts. Excellence is for the single source of truth. Things like financial reporting, regulatory data, and core component KPIs. This data has to be precise, very precise, and there cannot be any compromises. But agility is for learning. So if you want, for example, quickly test some hypothesis, like will users click this button or whatever, you don't need perfect data model. You just need to fire a simple sometimes at least, a simple front-end event for a few hours to validate the hypothesis. Here the speed of learning is far more valuable than accuracy. So you need to be able to differentiate those.
And especially for learning, I guess that in these cases, you need to leverage tons of web and application data. You said that you don't control the device anymore, but still you can track user behavior, and it's certainly super useful for the data-driven decisions, let's say for product development, interface, about the button, about the scroll bar, etc. For example, there's tools such as Mixpanel. And what's your experience in this area? How the user behavior data help to really shape the product and how it looks like?
Yeah, so for me, it's critical, right, to understand how people behave. Because, of course, you have researchers, you can talk with the people, you can listen what they talk. But one thing is what people say, another is what they do, at least sometimes, usually, actually. So this is pretty tricky area because especially if you're a market leader, right, like we are, because from one hand, it's great. We are honored, to have massive amount of clients, massive amount of transactions, etc., which give us so much data and basically endless possibilities. But from other hand, off-the-shelf solutions were often either extremely expensive with the scale of our business or not functionally complete enough for our needs, or both. Actually, usually both. So over the time, we developed a hybrid approach. So we built custom events API, which fed directly into our Google data warehouse. I'm talking now about so-called behavioral data, not the transactional, which were like more precise, right? So this gave us raw flexible data, which we could analyze in the Google Data Warehouse. And we are using also the other tools like open source Unleash tool, which is kind of a feature flagging tool, but it also allows for A/B testing. And actually we found extremely useful. There were also Hotjar and UXCam, which we used to qualitative insights like see the heat maps or session recordings. This was very powerful tool, especially in connection with the events, when we could precisely pinpoint the sessions which we are interested with. But yeah, this is always a matter of the quality of the data. I have to admit that I'm a big fan of medallion architecture. It's like a framework which separates the data into different, let's say, buckets: gold, silver, and bronze. Gold is where everything needs to be very precise, like for this single source of root data, which we were talking before. Silver is aggregated and cleaned. Bronze is the raw data. So with those experiments and web, we were like jumping in between this bronze and silver, never to gold, because it wasn't needed, right? Even the sampling the data was, as long as the sample group was representative, it was totally fine.
Okay. Do you think you can share some examples? What sort of decisions you were able to make for the product that were pretty surprising, let's say, and that you didn't expect, thanks to the data?
Yeah, so, there is what I know that from the practice, the more tests you perform, the least impactful they are, right? So the biggest realization, biggest changes actually are at the very beginning, right? With the stuff which are let's say there's a first iteration, you find some problems, you A/B test that, and you can find sometimes very spectacular differences. To be honest, I cannot talk about some specifics, but one of the examples which rings a bell when you ask about it is the registration flow. And because, there's so many small stuff which you can play with. For example, how you order the input fields in a form, or whether there will be single question of the time, would there be 5, or what like a different colors of error messages or even error under the inputs are displayed. It all can make a difference. And if you're precise about what you want to achieve, you can bring up, let's say, 5 ideas. You can quite easily, of course, depend on your stack, perform such experiment, and you can be very surprised with the outcome. And for example, this registration is a nice example because this is quite easy to count it with, because there's some specific amount of people which enter the registration, specific amount of people who finish it, specific amount of the people who later do the first deposit, and you also know how much money they spend eventually, what's the lifetime value of such clients, right? So this is something which can be counted even to single euro or single dollar or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. And all accumulated, making a great impact.
Yep. So you can measure it, for example, for 2 weeks, and then later extrapolate this to a year or half of the year. So even tiny, uplift can eventually lead to some significant amount of the money at the end of the year.
Very well. I got last one for you. I think it's my favorite because oftentimes when working with customers, it's a situation that we encounter pretty often, yes. Let's imagine that we hand out the capability to do the self-service and let our business users or people in the business teams create reports. Fast forward half year later, there's multiple people in different teams that created the report both on the NGR, let's say, or NDC or whatever metric. And they both created their reports independently. And then there starts the discussion. Who's right? How do you address such situations? How do you make sure that everyone really relies on this single source of truth?
Yeah. So with great powers comes great responsibility, right? So you need to be very careful with power which you give to the people. Because, for example, if you allow people to create multiple variants of the same KPIs in different data sets, in different tools, it's inevitable that you end up with what you said, right? So either you can accept that because it supports making business decisions faster and make better business decisions, and that's fine as long as you remember about this issue which you generated. Or decision must be totally opposite. So no, in some areas we can't, right? And it needs to be done consciously. And actually you need to monitor this all the time because people don't keep rules. They need something, they create something, and they use something. So you need to watch out, have some set of rules, and ultimately think about the benefit for the business. That's what I believe.
Yeah, especially what you say, it reminds me of a story that we had with one company that had 14 million customers online, and the most popular report was a GGR report created by some account manager that stopped working for that company, and this was used by 40% of the people, and they were making decisions based on that. And sometimes the governance is not a bad choice, quite the opposite.
Yep, exactly, right? If they, of course, start doing taxes from this report, it may become nasty at some point, right? But then this is totally different story, right? I know, I'm in a podcast about the data, and people who are really into data, they live, breathe the data, they get money out of the data, but data are not for the data, for sake of the data, right? We collect them, we process them, we create all those dashboards and everything to make better decisions, right? In the business on daily basis. So it's not about building the fanciest and the best data warehouse on the earth, or very strict about the set of KPIs which are using in the company. It may slow you down, and if you want to do so, fine, but I don't believe this is beneficial for your company. Maybe you could be, but not your company.
I think this wraps up very well our discussion. It reminds me of this example that the trains are for passengers and not for train drivers. And likewise, data is for the business to improve the decision making and not for BI developers to create great reports, yeah?
Exactly. But you guys are very important in it. So it's not like, that I'm saying you're not important or your craftsmanship is not important or whatever. It is very important, but don't lose, the goal out of your eyes.
Totally agreed with you. So, guys, that's gonna be it for today. Thanks a lot, Michał, for this very interesting interview.
Thank you very much.
Just a few words of a wrap-up, guys. If you have not done it already before, please hit the follow button on Spotify and as well on our LinkedIn page on DataRoll. And if you'd like to participate in the next episode or know someone who would be a good fit, just hit me up. And that's it for today. Time to sign off for now. And to remember, keep rolling with the data.